Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Vivek Joshi, your host with Aftermarket Champions, bringing you yet another exciting episode. Today, my guest is Meindert Flikkema. Meindert is a professor at VU in the Netherlands. He is a professor of innovation strategies for services. And we had a recent conversation where I found his area of research and practice quite interesting. And I thought it was very valuable for our practitioners to hear about it. So I invited Minder to come join the show today, and he was very kind to oblige and join us today for a brief recording. Minder, it's good to have you. Uh, we met last week, obviously. I know a little bit about your research interests. I know a little bit about your practice in terms of your consulting. But maybe you can give a little, share a little bit of your life story, if you may, with our listeners, because it's always good to get the context for what brought you here. So, Minder,
Yeah,
let's hear about you a little bit.
yeah, sure, Vivek. Well, first of all, thank you for having me in this podcast. It's really an honor to meet and to talk about our joint hobby, I would say,
Yes.
our joint passion. And but let me introduce myself a bit. Um, so I was born in the 70s, and I did a master's study in econometrics I finished it in the mid 90s and started my career in the consulting industry. Worked for approximately, let's say, 8 to 10 years as a management consultant. And at that time, it was very much focused on improving business processes. So in 1995, as an econometrician, I read the book by Hammer and Champy. And it was all
The
about
famous one. Yes.
business process reengineering. So then I decided to return to academia, to return to the university, to Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, so Free University Amsterdam. And I became an assistant professor, did my PhD in service innovation. I also continued my career in the university, became associate professor, and in 2021 I became full professor of service innovation strategies.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Full professor is a big deal. Now, I have to ask you, so when you were in consulting, you did basic management consulting, which is, improvements, restructuring, strategy, and all these things.
Yes.
The Hammer and Champion book, I distinctly remember that book. I was a young business school graduate when that book came out. I think pretty much all of us went and bought it and read it, and it is a big part of the movement, if you may, in terms of business improvement back then.
Mhm.
What led you to go into the service innovation aspect? Because that was a little different from what the Hammer and Champion reference was, right?
Oh yeah,
Why
definitely.
service
So
innovation was something that you were excited about?
yeah, basically it was because I was in the service industry myself.
Okay,
So consulting can be considered a service industry, professional
sure.
services, and I had the experience that actually we sold a lot of innovation to our clients, but we were not that innovative ourselves, in my opinion.
Interesting.
So I always wanted to improve my services, and I was kind of a reflective practitioner. I concluded that, well, in my opinion, the group in which I was not that innovative myself. And I thought, okay, I'm going to study this. I'm going to do. It was also kind of frustration of mine.
Yeah,
So, and that's why I started to study service innovation. At that time, it was really a new topic. So everyone was focused on product innovation, and
hmm
there were so many papers out there about, well, let's say, stage gate models and new product development. But service innovation was really a new field.
yeah.
So out of frustration, I entered the field actually.
Got it. But it's interesting, the service innovation was not necessarily service innovation in the context of manufacturing, but
No,
service
not
broadly speaking, because professional service, like you said, in consulting is a service.
yeah,
It's interesting you say that because years ago when I was head of marketing for a very large technology company's services business,
yeah,
the services business had four product lines, I think. We had repair, which is a field service and technical support.
yeah,
We had professional services, we had educational services, and then we had implementation services,
yeah.
right? Which is kind of related to professional service, but professional service is kind of consulting. So we actually had four different services, and they were all deemed services, and we had to worry about service innovation and marketing. So I'm glad to hear that it was more than break fix
Yeah,
innovation, right?
yeah. Absolutely. So actually, it was. at that time I was full time in academia, but I still did some consulting jobs myself. And yeah, so the outside field, outside world, they became aware that I was into services,
Right.
and I got a request from a company to give a talk about servitization.
Oh,
And I never heard about servitization before, and I later on became aware that this was all about the aftermarket business.
right.
And yeah, so that was actually it was a kickoff of my career in the manufacturing industry. And my
Interesting.
well, it was a big uh, a big change of my field of interest.
Right. I was going to say,
So
because your field of interest originally was broadly service innovation that applied to professional services and any kinds of service related things. And you
exactly,
switch to the servitization idea where you go into the hard goods business, durable
exactly,
goods business. How did
yeah,
that shift? I mean, obviously, you gave the story how you were invited to do this talk, but
yeah,
how did it then become a area of focus for you? Then is that something you realize that there's a wide
yeah.
open field and very few people are in it, or was there something particularly unique that attracted you to it?
It was I liked actually initially I liked it because it was a completely new field, and there was also something like there was a kind of a confrontation of two logics. It seemed the product dominant logic and the service dominant logic. I later on also read about this service logic in a book by Fargo and Lush. So they are my colleagues and they are my sources of inspiration
Mm,
also. Um, that was actually it started with the apparent different logics, and I also realized already during my presentation that although I was a big fan of services, in manufacturing they were actually not. So they considered many of them they considered services as a kind of a must have. In Japan, they feel ashamed if they would talk about services because your product has to be so good that there is no need for services. And services was always considered a kind of a cost center. So there were not that many people already in my first presentation who were kind of supporters of this field, though that was not a reason for me to give up because
right.
it made me even more convinced that there was something out there. And I learned a lot about how to bring services in manufacturing actually, and I'm still learning a lot about that.
It's interesting that what you said is fascinating. How long ago was this? First time you made the
Oh,
presentation on servitization, 10, 15 years
must
ago?
have been more than 20 years ago.
Ah, and this is 2024 now.
Yeah,
How
so
has
it
that changed in the 20 years? Is it still lonely?
no, yeah, well, sometimes it still feels a little lonely, but I know that there is more and more momentum for services, I think. There are some great examples of companies who made this business transformation and are successful with services, are successful with their aftermarket strategy. And there are also some extra reasons for creating more momentum, and I think one is the importance of sustainability.
Hmm.
So the life cycle of a product becomes more and more important in the manufacturing industry, which is also giving a lot of opportunities for services. And secondly, is the importance of digitalization and data. So through, let's say, interfaces in supply chains are more and more integrated and connected, which is also an enabler of
Hmm.
introducing services on top of products or even replacing products by services. So there is more momentum, and I get less lonely, and I get more supporters. But I'm still very happy if I meet people who are very enthusiastic, like you are, Vivek, about the aftermarket business.
Well, sometimes this weekend I was just thinking about some of the conversations I've been having recently, and LinkedIn is a favorite platform where I like to post ideas and material and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
I have half a mind to post a Don Quixote image on the LinkedIn. Remember Don Quixote, the Spanish
yeah,
story about the poor guy tilting at windmills alone
yeah,
by himself. And
yeah.
that's what it sometimes feels like in this industry where you talk about service and people look at you like you got two heads. right? And
Yeah.
so why are you talking about this stuff? So,
Yeah.
but if you pick on what you just said, right? Two things you said which are I think important. One is it was a relatively less populated, less popular field.
Yeah.
B, it was still considered a cost center back when you started it.
Yeah.
And C, the idea of innovation was very foreign,
Yeah.
if you may, to that group of people. 20 years ago versus today, how have things changed in each of these areas? You know, we talked about,
Yeah.
you know,
I think in a lot more cases, companies are making a profit with services, though still a lot are also struggling with it. There is something going on out there, and that is, I would say, the development of product as a service. So the kind of SaaS, PaaS, CaaS kind of a solution.
hmm
So still many companies now think that they have to transform their business into a kind of a PaaS solution, which is
hmm
not a very good idea. I think you can't bypass these kind of trajectories. So more and more manufacturing firms are basically making a profit with services, but there is, at least in Europe, there is one new challenge, and that is the labor market challenge, I would say.
hmm hmm
Um, there is a big problem in Europe. I don't know how it is in US, but finding good people and also making sure they stay with you is more and more difficult. So nowadays, firms are really competing on both their, let's say, end market, but also on the labor market. And sometimes the competition on the labor market is even more stronger. And
Absolutely.
still, there is this idea in many managers in manufacturing firms' head that services are labor intensive. So this is a new barrier, or this is a new
hmm
threshold, this is a new obstacle for managing the change, the business change towards combinations of products and services. But it's okay. So it means that there is momentum, but also there is a new barrier. And I still think that the ideas about services are quite persistent.
hmm
I mean, the reputation of services is, yeah, we also discussed this before,
hmm
Vivek. So the reputation is that, okay, services, sales doesn't want to sell services. They want to sell product because they can do big transactions and they love to make to close these big deals. And so that's one. Second is services were always used as a kind of closing stuff. So I mean,
I'll give
if
it
you
away.
can't close the deal, you just give away your maintenance contract,
Right,
right? So for
right.
free. So then if you start discussing services in manufacturers, they will tell you, oh my goodness, are we going to give away everything for free now? So that's another one. Um, Second is that in manufacturing firms, people want to manufacture things, right? They want to make things. And so when you talk services, they will ask you how to manufacture,
Right.
how to make services. It's very difficult. So, well, I can discuss. There is a very long list with potential problems with services from the change management perspective. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So, if you want to hear more, I can tell you more
Yeah,
about this.
I'm interested in that because so I've been around business for as long as you haven't. From the early 90s, I've been in manufacturing and then service and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. Unfortunately, everything you just described to me was there in the early 90s and is still there in a lot of the companies. And
Yeah.
to me, the never-ending puzzle or riddle is why is this the case? And I'm going to tie it back to something you just said. You talked about labor shortages.
Yeah.
I position this as a huge retirement crisis coming in. I mean, there are people
Yeah.
of my generation, maybe less so your generation, but definitely people of my generation are retiring. But also at the same time, minded, the people in my generation have been the most resistant to this idea that a customer satisfaction can be more than just a beautiful, fantastic product. It is the combination of products, services, and everything else, experiences you do that
Yeah.
make this thing better. And I almost wonder if it's going to take this dramatic generational change to happen before the next before this wave of change starts. And that's something that I've been thinking about it because again, look, I've been in this manufacturing world for 32 years, post business school, and nothing has changed,
Yeah, I
right?
think I think it's also indeed I agree with you on this issue that I agree with you on this because I think our generation, is quite persistent. If I see my junior colleagues in the consulting firm I'm employed with at the moment, then in the past we all want to have a lease car, right? We all want to have this, that, and so on and so forth. So nowadays they just want to use it.
Yeah,
So if you tell them, how about your lease car, they will tell you, I'm not going to take a lease
I'm not.
car. It's too expensive. If I need a car, I just call Uber.
Yeah. On
That's it.
demand service is
On
a big
demand,
deal.
just on
Yeah.
demand. So I think, yeah, well, probably we have to wait for another decade and then we are retired. Though I also see that, well, our generation will probably have to work many, many years.
Longer, yeah.
But anyway, longer, yeah.
But it's interesting, right? So there's a couple of
Yeah,
topics out here that are worth looking. So one of the things I've been saying for the last, I'd say at least a year, maybe longer, in the
yeah.
U.S. at least, is and maybe I'm not a professor like you, but I pay attention to economics, macroeconomics, and policy a lot.
Mm,
There's the Western countries, OECD countries, maybe the US, Canada, European sector, the EU, and Japan, maybe to some degree. And now it seems China is kind of in the same boat. We're all facing a massively aging population
yes.
compared to the rest of the world. This aging population is manifesting itself even worse in industries like manufacturing, other stuff where people haven't gone into the generation behind us isn't coming into this as much. So
No.
then, if you tie this to innovation, my belief has always been that the only way to bridge this shortage of people and talent and skill is to build innovation into product, build innovation into service, and build technology that's innovative enough that you can still provide this experience to your customers at scale,
Yeah.
right? Is that kind of how you're seeing it? Is that how some of your both clients or the people
Yeah.
in academic world are seeing it as well, or
Yeah, well, so in the past, it was just servitization. Nowadays, it is called digital servitization.
digital service?
So, of course, also because of the developments in the labor market, but also because of technological developments, manufacturers are also getting aware, and particularly consultants are getting more aware of the role that technology might play
Mhm.
also in the interfaces between clients and providers. So many companies are offering services without any person involved in it.
Mhm, mhm.
So, and then I'm not talking about answering frequently asked questions. I'm
Right.
also talking about providers of solutions in horticulture sector, for example.
Mm,
So these systems are suggesting the owners or the farmers what to do with their crops.
mm,
So, and there is nobody involved in that. So there is a lot of predictive maintenance going on nowadays. So I think that I think with technology we can also make the lives of employees even better, both in the companies of our customers as well as in our own companies. Let me give
right.
one example. So, for example, you see in manufacturing industries that if you build a machine is worth nothing if nobody can work with it.
Right.
So, but still, so it means that because of the labor shortages, you have to minimize the amount of effort a human has to put on the machine. That's one. But still, you need operators.
Mhm.
So, operators are really a struggle because they are leaving in months. So,
Right.
it is very important to make sure that you can onboard him in a split second, in
Mhm,
days, and
mhm,
not in weeks because they will
mhm.
disappear soon. So, if you can help to onboard the operators downstream in the supply chain, that's of tremendous help to customers. So, we
Interesting.
always tend to think in manufacturing that we have to improve the machines,
Right, right.
but basically, we have to. The most important contribution nowadays many manufacturers and OEMs can have is through system optimization because it
Mhm,
ultimately the machine is in a system, and that's where the advanced services come in, I think.
mhm, mhm.
So I really like to think about, well,
Interesting.
making the perfect supply chain actually,
Right, right.
and their technology and services play a dominant role.
Let me ask you two different questions. You
Yeah,
mentioned digital servitization.
yeah,
Look, digitization has been around for at least 5, 7 years, maybe longer, right? This thesis about digitization and servitization.
yeah,
Again, I don't want to sound like the skeptic, but I'm skeptical. I don't see enough of this beyond a little experiment here, a little experiment there. Are you seeing this as so putting an innovation hat on? What is preventing these companies from building out some digital servitization at scale? Because
yeah,
right now, we can talk about connected machines, we can talk about this. It's
yeah,
all small stuff, pilot stuff, right?
yeah.
Nothing big. What's holding that back?
You mean what to do?
What to do? Why aren't people making it happen in large scale deployments, right? Why is it still stuck on experiment with 50 machines, 100 machines? Nothing more than that.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a very good question. I think these transitions they really take time. That's one. So it's not although people have the impression that with services, well, that's an intangible product, you can make it overnight, right?
Right.
So it's not too it can't be too difficult, but still I see that this is also a misunderstanding about servitization, about this very difficult business transformation. So you have to take time and you have to be persistent because I always see that giving this misinterpretation, this misunderstanding of the business transformation, that as soon as you have to pay some learning money, and you always have to pay learning money in these kind of trajectories,
Right.
that they go back to normal. They go back to products. And it also becomes very much clear during these transformations that the products are also suboptimal.
Hmm.
So the proof of your product is through its services, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you start these projects, the servitization and the big business transformations, then it also becomes aware that there are some imperfections in your product, that there are also some things that are hardly used in the from the product. That it is too complicated, and so on and so forth. So, and another issue that also pops up is that is about data governance. So I always see, if I still give talks about the importance of the aftermarket and the
Yeah.
potential of the aftermarket, and still there are some arguments in the audience for not doing it. And one of the favorite arguments nowadays, in the past it was sales, but today it is data governance and it is security.
Mm.
So people are dead scared. Companies are dead scared that they lose their data, that they get attacked by cyber criminals, and so on and so forth. So that's also. But I'm still convinced that services is the end game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still convinced. The question is how to get there. How to
Right.
get there. That's the key question.
That's an
And
important one too.
yeah,
The one thing that occurs to me is that in your body of research, not just as an academic, but as a consultant for the last 15, 20 years,
yeah,
so we've probably seen a group of people, a group of manufacturers that does this well,
yeah,
and there's a group that doesn't do so well,
yeah,
right? So if I were to ask you what separates the champions or the superstars from the
yeah,
rest, what are the top two or three things that come to mind
yeah.
that make them champions, the innovation champions, service champions, whatever it could be?
Yeah, this is what I've learned from one of my colleagues in the industry. And he made me really aware of who are the champions, what distinguishes the champions from the, let's say, the laggards and the
Laggards,
losers
yeah.
and so on. And it seems to be a quite straightforward lesson, but it has to do with clients, the involvement of clients. There is this tendency in the manufacturing industry to start immediately making things. So pushing things. And um, I literally beg CEOs, C-level executives of manufacturing firms, okay, if they want to do something with services, okay, let's visit some clients. So
Mhm.
let's focus on their systems, not only on your product, but on their
On their
systems.
system
Let's have a
side, yeah.
look downstream in the supply chain, what's going on there. And consequently, I want to um, seek some commitments, some resource commitments from both sides. So, okay, I don't believe that much into business cases, but I believe in commitments. So
Mm-hmm.
commitments are kind of,
Mm-hmm.
if there are no resource commitments, nothing will come out. So
It's
if
all
there is no joint willingness to
that's
invest
right.
in basically integrating the supply chain,
That's right.
if there is no
That's right.
win-win, nothing will
Right.
happen.
Right. So that's a big piece of it. Are there any other lessons that you've learned from the service champions, innovation champions
Yeah.
versus the ones who aren't?
The second lesson is, I think that it is really a kind of small step journey. So bypasses will be punished. So there are some people who have seen people like me or you or some other gurus talking about product as a service, or someone screaming in the market about recurring revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody would be against recurring revenue. But if there is no value behind it, then, well, it's not a very good idea.
Right.
So bypassing, so I really think in terms of small step transformation, and basically in terms of maturity levels.
Hmm.
So um, so and you can't bypass these maturity levels, because going to another level, to the next level, requires a lot of adjustments, and is a big change management challenge. So, and it is also, the challenge is also, it's basically my most recent thinking is about mitigating risks. So this change, you're not able to mitigate all the risks at once. So you really need to have a kind of an ecosystem with different actors in it to be able to mitigate the risks that you take over basically from your client if you are into services.
I'm smiling because one of the things we started publishing about a year or two ago is this notion of an aftermarket maturity model.
Yeah,
And we just try to make it very simple because we're not superstar academics like you are, but we're just thinking about how should people think about this stuff? And we literally came up with a maturity model of 4 steps. That first step is you're literally simple reactive
yeah,
companies waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for emails to come in, and so on and so forth,
yeah,
all the way to step number 4 or 5, which is nirvana, which is things are automated, intelligent, and independent. And I'm telling you, everybody I talk to is still stuck at step number 1 or 2.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah,
tell people, I actually had this very direct discussion with a prospect the other day,
yeah,
and they really wanted to do something with us. Like, great. I said, tell me a little bit about your organization.
yeah,
Who are the XYZ, sales or service and this and that? And tell me a little bit about the process you have. How you, coming back to your transformation and hammer and champion. Tell me about the business process you have. What's going on here? How are you thinking about this stuff?
yeah,
And I told him at the end, it's like, look, I think at least 2, 3 years away from thinking about technology of the entitled type, because
yeah,
you're at level 1 maturity model. You have so much work to do to
yeah,
fundamentally change your company and your businesses and your process. Come back
yeah,
to me in a couple of years. Let's stay in touch. And people get shocked when I say that. But that is a issue that I see as part of aftermarket champions, is a huge maturity issue
yeah.
in the market today, right?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So that's the second. It's very important to think in terms of maturity, and so that's why I always say, well, okay, if you want to bypass this trajectory, so it's also with teenagers, right? If you never, if you're 12 or 13 and you want to behave like an adult, well,
Yeah.
soon you will be punished by the people around you. They will kick
Exactly.
you out. They will
Exactly.
make fun of you, and so on and so forth. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Excellent. And so when you consider the practice you've been working on in the consulting plus the academic practice that you have
yeah.
on service innovation, what do you think are the next 3 to 5 years people should be thinking about?
Well, I'm very curious to see how sustainability will be embedded in business models. So, if companies are taking this more and more seriously, and I think there are some, at least in Europe, some, and that's the difference with US, I think, some very important directives that will really force companies to do something with
Interesting.
sustainability. And I think it's a very good idea, because the most important driver of innovation is still rules and regulations.
Mm,
That's also what I've learned from my own research. It has
mm.
nothing to do with, let's say, potential
Human
in
motivation
markets
or
or whatever.
potential.
Yeah, yeah, it has to do with rules and regulations. That's
Interesting.
the strongest force of innovation. So
Interesting.
if you're losing your license to operate, then you will
Then-
definitely fight for it.
Right.
And then the
Right.
Darwinist in you will become very, very strong.
Yeah.
So
That's an interesting point. I mean, I never associate regulation with innovation, but the absence of regulation maybe makes innovation less interesting because nobody's forced to do anything, right?
yeah,
As I say, motherhood. What's that? Necessity is a motherhood invention, and
yeah,
in this case, the necessity of staying out of jail or necessity of staying in business kind of
yes,
makes you innovative about trying to figure out things. That's an interesting point out there. So, sustainability regulation, that's actually quite
yeah.
important.
I
We
think
don't see
that will
that
be
in the
the
US as much. Maybe
yeah,
this is a European thing, but certainly in the US, the pressure on sustainability, I know this sounds terrible, but I just don't think people care about it enough. This is
yeah.
this is hard to say that sentence what I just said, but I just
Uh,
don't see people caring about it enough in the US.
Yeah, and I think another one is that um, I think also the role of venture capitalist.
Mm,
Venture capitalist is a very important one. So I think that the way corporates are financed is more and more through venture
mm,
capital.
mm.
So which will be a driving force also of more sustainable business models.
Got it.
So venture capitalists, they don't basically they like services more and contracts more than just transactions.
They want recurring revenue. That's all they're looking for.
They want recurring revenue.
Yeah.
So the institutional landscape, the structure of the financial sector, is also very important for how it will go with services, how the business models will change in manufacturing. And this is what I see as an important driving force. Luckily, because I'm very positive about services, um, and yeah, this and labor shortages are the third
Yeah.
driving force.
Yeah.
So I fully agree with you about the aging populations, particularly in countries like Japan and also many countries in Europe,
Europe and US, absolutely.
US as well. So
Absolutely.
that will be a big driving force. So yeah, these three forces, I think, will be very critical. And of course, technology development itself, that's also a driving force.
Got it. Excellent. Well, Minder, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think the ideas you shared, especially the last three ideas, are really powerful and important for people to think about.
Mm,
The notion of maturity is important as you couple that with these ideas that you have. You can't graduate from kindergarten to college. You
No,
have to go through the steps of growing and going through these processes and these drivers. It'll be interesting to see how things shape up. Now, one question for you is, how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way to do it? So we can make sure that as the listeners have any ideas or questions or
oh
really want to
yeah,
get some advice from you, they can reach out to you.
definitely. They can always reach out. So I still have the hybrid profile. So I'm a full professor, but also in the consulting industry. And I think it's a very interesting combination because I can benefit from the best of both worlds. And so they can reach out. They can find me quite easily, I think. So if they Google my name, so Meindert Flikkema, Professor Meindert Flikkema, they will find me either
Perfect.
on the website of the consulting firm I'm employed with or in VU University Amsterdam.
Perfect. And there's a
So
simple
that's
email address they can reach out to, minder.m.flickema,
yeah, it's
m.g.
m.g.flikkema. So m.g.flikkema at vu.nl. That's
Perfect.
the university address, and from there on we will see which route to take, either the academic one or so.
Consulting
It
one.
can be
Yeah.
interesting to take the academic one, but it's also interesting to to see if the consulting route is an interesting one.
Excellent. Well, Minded, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our guests are going to really get something to think about here, especially those who are more forward thinking and innovative and how they can kind of couple these ideas with what they're doing today. So, with that, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. We'll be publishing the recording soon, and I'm excited to see how we can collaborate as well, you and I, in the future as well. So,
Yeah,
thank you for
thank you
your
so
time
much.
today.
It was a very nice conversation. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you.